The ballroom lights spilled through the glass doors, bright enough to make the rain outside look like silver threads. I stood at the entrance of the Meridian, smoothing the fabric of the green dress I'd worn the night we signed our first major contract. It had fit then. It still did now, though the years had changed how it hung on my shoulders. "Name, please," the security guard asked without looking up. His voice was polite, but mechanical. "Corinne Halden," I said, smiling as though it mattered. "I'm here for the Halden Systems Gala." He scrolled down his iPad, the glow flickering against his face. Then came that slight shake of the head, the kind reserved for misunderstandings that weren't misunderstandings at all. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Your name isn't on the guest list." I thought maybe he'd missed it. I leaned closer, lowering my voice. "That's my son's company. Dorian Halden." He checked again, slower this time. "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Halden is hosting, but only listed guests can enter. Only listed guests." Through the glass, I could see the room unfolding like a world I no longer belonged to. Long tables lined with silverware. A banner printed with our company logo, his company now. My name had once been there too, right under the title, Founder. Then I saw him. Dorian. My boy grown into the man I'd built everything for. He was laughing with two investors. I recognized one hand resting lightly on the back of a woman in a sequined gown. When his eyes met mine, the laughter didn't falter. He said something to her, and she turned, smiling faintly, before glancing away. Even through the glass, I could read his lips. She wouldn't understand any of this anyway. The guard shifted awkwardly. "Would you like me to tell him you're here?" "No," I said, adjusting the strap of my purse. "He already knows." I stepped aside, pulled out my phone, and began typing one message, brief and clear. Then I walked into the rain, not looking back, my hand still trembling as I pressed send. The message sent, I kept walking. Not quickly, not with anger, just forward. Past the valet stand, past the couples stepping out of black cars in velvet and suits. My car was parked 3 blocks down, under the same streetlight that flickered in winter. I reached it before the memories caught up. We started in the garage, of course. Me and an old Dell tower I bought secondhand from a university surplus auction. I worked full-time at Martin's print shop during the day, order tracking scheduling runs, fighting with the laminator. Then I came home, put on tea, and opened my textbooks. Supply chain modeling, data theory, predictive patterning. I never missed a night class, never missed a shift. Dorian was still in school then. On weekends, I made him sit with me while I tested interface mock-ups. "This is all back-end, Mom," he used to say, grinning. "No one cares about this stuff. They care when it fails," I'd tell him. "They just don't know it yet." The first version of our software, Halden Track, ran out of a laptop that sounded like a jet engine when it processed. But it worked. It tracked inbound goods with 93% accuracy across 3 test clients. I landed my first contract from a cold call and a spreadsheet. When Dorian graduated, I gave him the title of COO. I didn't need it. I was tired and hopeful. He was smart, confident, and charming in ways I wasn't. I told him I'd just want to build, not be the face. He smiled, wide. "It'll always be your company, Mom." He used to mean that. I remember the day the website changed. My name was moved from the header to a paragraph in the About section. Founder Emeritus, just above the company's mission statement. I didn't say anything. He told me once that stories don't matter as much as results. But I built both line by line, client by client. My name was there in every keystroke. I unlocked the door, slid into the driver's seat, and placed the phone on the console. The rain had slowed, but the silence hadn't. I turned the key. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. It started with the press releases. Small things easy to miss unless you were looking. And I wasn't at first. I was just proud. When Halden Systems announced its expansion into mid-market logistics, the headline read, "Dorian Halden leads bold shift in operational strategy." No mention of the baseline model I'd written for that very shift. I assumed it was an oversight. Then came the patents. We had always filed them under joint authorship when appropriate. But the newest one's code optimizations based on the original Halden track build were listed under revised development by D. Halden. The original filings were marked inactive, superseded. I asked the legal coordinator, a new hire, about it. She said she'd check. She never followed up. I told Margot over lunch, stirring soup I didn't eat. They're probably just rebranding, I said, almost believing myself. Streamlining the message. Margot frowned, or rewriting it. Then the Gala invitation came. A thick white envelope addressed in perfect type. Mr. Dorian Halden. No +1. No mention of me. I had my assistant check the database 3 times. There was no mistake. Margot tried to soften it. Maybe he thought you'd feel out of place. He decided that for me, I said. It wasn't about a chair at a table. It was the slow removal of every piece of me that had built that table in the first place. I returned to the office the next day. The office felt smaller than I remembered. The smell of burnt coffee and old carpet clung to the air just as it had years ago when we were still building prototypes with borrowed equipment. The front lights were off, but my access badge still opened the door. No one questioned why I was there. Most of the new employees didn't know who I was. I walked to the back where the server cabinets hummed in the half-dark. My desk had been reassigned months ago, but the old terminal in the archive room still recognized my credentials. The login prompt blinked at me like it had been waiting. The backup system opened easily. Inside the dated folder structures was my handwriting in digital form, the shorthand tags I'd used for years. HAL INV 1.0, track loop, rote predictor. Files I could have recognized in my sleep. The code was still running. I opened the documentation. There it was, bold and sterile, Halden Dynamic Logic, author D.H. Dorian Halden. Every algorithm that had built the company's reputation, every cost reduction, every predictive success, it all stemmed from the system I'd written on that old Dell tower. I scrolled line by line, my logic, my syntax, my structure perfectly intact. Even the small typo in the earliest commit comment, the one I'd meant to fix years ago, was still there. I sat back and stared at the screen until the cursor blurred. My breath felt heavier than anger, colder than grief, quiet, controlled. The company's savings last quarter had been their highest ever. I had seen the numbers in trade publications, heard them quoted on panels, all built on my work. And my name had been replaced by 3 letters. I reached into my bag, pulled out a portable drive, and copied everything. The source files, the backups, the modification logs. Every piece of proof that my hands had built what his signature claimed. When the transfer bar finished, I ejected the drive and opened one more file, the operating agreement. My name sat beside a clause Dorian had probably forgotten existed. I never rescinded my founder rights. I clicked print. Then I began drafting a message to Glenn Revell. The email arrived late on a Thursday, subject line empty, sender name, vaguely familiar. Daniel Kwan, one of the junior developers I'd mentored years ago. He must have pulled my old contact from an autocomplete field without realizing. The thread was brief. A few sentences thanking Dorian for the opportunity to contribute to the revised logic framework, and an attached draft contract for licensing the core patents. I almost deleted it. Then I saw the attachment name, Halden Systems IP, Exclusive Assignment Agreement PDF. I opened it slowly. The language was standard until it wasn't. The technical specifications were mine verbatim segments from the original Halden track documentation, only slightly reworded. But the attribution section listed Dorian Halden as the sole inventor. I kept reading. Page 6. Near the bottom, a clause highlighted in yellow, non-compete override, shall be automatically granted upon confirmation of founder's exit from all roles, duties, and voting rights. I stopped. There it was, the trap half executed. The clause depended on a resignation that had never happened. I'd never signed anything, never submitted formal notice. I had stepped back, yes, but legally, I still held title and voting shares. He had built the entire maneuver on the assumption I wouldn't notice, or that I wouldn't care. I clicked forward, addressed it to my lawyer, Maureen Tran. No message. Just the document. Then I stood up, walked to the kitchen and put the kettle on. I waited for the click of the boil. I opened the drawer where I kept the hard copies of our original founding documents and pulled out the thick file folder marked Founders Equity, Retention Clauses. I poured my tea, slowly, steady hands, steady breath. Dorian hadn't made a mistake. He'd made a move. And so had I. The next morning, Maureen called before 9 a.m. I let it ring twice before picking up. She didn't greet me. "You have him," she said. "It's enough to trigger a board review. Then let's begin." Glenn chose the same booth he always did. Corner table at Madison's, away from the bar, close to the windows. He stood as I approached, still gracious in the way men of his generation were taught to be. "Corinne," he said warmly, "you look well." "I'm not," I said. "But I'm here." We ordered out of habit, more than hunger. Glenn folded his hands as I placed a slim folder between us on the table. "This is the original build sheet for Halden Track," I said, "the one we pitched to Vertex back in 2015. Look at the back-end model. It's still the one generating 80% of the company's cost savings." He opened it and scanned for no more than 30 seconds before his face stiffened. "This is still what's running." "Yes, with minor overlays, but the logic's unchanged, and it's mine." He looked up. "Dorian told us you sold everything to him. Years ago." I shook my head. "I just stepped back. I never divested. I hold 12% quietly through a dormant trust." He leaned back, letting out a low whistle. "Well, damn." I let him process. We both knew the implications. With 12% and documentation, I could force a vote on any internal matter, including executive conduct. "I don't want revenge," I said finally. "I want correction." Glenn looked out the window for a long moment, then back to me. "You sure?" I nodded. "You once called me the backbone of American logistics." I didn't forget. He smiled faintly. "I meant it." He tapped the folder twice, then folded it closed. "Then call a meeting." We parted without handshakes or promises. Just an understanding. By the time I got home, Maureen had already sent over the board request letter pre-drafted and ready for my signature. I reviewed every line, then signed at the bottom in pen. I scanned and sent it back, then sat at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. The operating system blinked to life. I opened the logs. My code still pulsed beneath the new skin they'd given it. Soon the board would see it too. They booked the room under a vague title, Internal Operations Review. No press, no assistants. Just the board, a company lawyer, and me. Dorian didn't attend. His assistant claimed he was traveling, but his name hung in the air long before I said it. I started with a folder placed neatly at the head of the table. One copy for each member. Inside code logs, timestamps, deployment records. Every system benchmark tied directly to my original framework. No edits, no gaps. Just continuity back to the first days of Halden Track. This, I said, is the foundation of the company. It has not changed. There was no rebuttal, only the quiet rustle of pages turning. Then I reached into my bag and pressed play. The recording was under 30 seconds. Dorian's voice clear, amused. "She built the bones, I just dressed them up. It's all still her stuff under the hood." Silence. Glenn was the first to speak. "How long have you had this? Long enough to know I'd only use it if I had to." The company lawyer, young, uncertain, asked if I had ever signed any waiver, any release of authorship. "No," I said. "Nor did I ever resign." He nodded, said nothing more. Glenn leaned back. "Then I'd like to raise a motion to initiate formal review into intellectual property misrepresentation specifically the use of proprietary systems without proper attribution or rights clearance. No one objected. The vote passed without dissent. Even the lawyer raised his hand. I sat still, hands folded in my lap, as they debated next steps, legal counsel, internal audits, who to inform first. Glenn looked at me again as the meeting wrapped. "Whatever happens next," he said, "thank you for bringing this directly." I nodded. It was never meant to be public. "It won't be," he said, "unless he forces it." I left quietly, stepping into the hallway, then into the elevator. When the doors closed, I didn't smile, but I did breathe deeper than I had in years. The night of the gala came with the same storm that had rolled through the city a week before, steady and deliberate. I parked in the same place as last time, 3 blocks down beneath the flickering streetlight that had watched me both build and lose everything. The hotel shone brighter than before, banners stretched across the awning, Halden Systems leading the future of logistics. The valet offered me an umbrella. I declined. I didn't plan to stay long. Inside the ballroom glowed with gold and glass. Through the window, I could see Dorian on stage, his hand raised mid-speech, accepting an award that wasn't real. Visionary Leadership and Innovation, a title invented by the PR team, recycled for anyone with enough money to sponsor a table. He looked confident, polished, rehearsed, the way I had taught him to be in front of a room. But there was a stiffness in his jaw, a flicker in his eyes when his phone, lying on the table beside his drink, began to vibrate. Then another phone. Then another. Glenn had timed it perfectly. The internal memo had been released to the board first, then to corporate legal, then to the investors' mailing list. A concise summary of the findings, authorship discrepancies, falsified filings pending review. The headline wasn't dramatic, but the implication was clear. Inside the ballroom, I saw confusion spread like ripples. Dorian paused mid-sentence. Someone at his table handed him their phone. His expression didn't change right away, just a quiet blink, then another. He took a sip of water, cleared his throat, and tried to keep speaking. The applause didn't come this time. I stayed until he stepped away from the podium, shaking a hand that wasn't extended back. Then I turned toward the parking lot. The rain was steady, soaking through the hem of my coat. I didn't hurry. When I reached the car, I sat for a moment watching the hotel lights shimmer against the wet pavement. The next morning, the story would begin without me. By dawn, every investor would know what the board already did. 2 weeks later, the press release appeared online at 6 a.m. The headline was simple: Halden Systems announces leadership transition. The article was shorter than most effective immediately. Dorian Halden has stepped down as Chief Executive Officer for personal reasons. The board of directors thanks him for his contributions and wishes him well in future endeavors. No mention of the investigation, of course. No mention of me either. But on the company's website under About Us, a small line had quietly reappeared. Founded by Corinne Halden in 2012. That was enough. Margot called that afternoon. "They're offering it to you," she said. Her voice half thrill, half exhaustion. "Full reinstatement. CEO with a compensation package that could pay off every mortgage in Worcester." "I don't want it," I said. "Not anymore." "You sure I built the structure?" I said. "I don't need to sit in it again." She didn't argue. She knew me too well, so I recommended her instead. Margot had been my operations lead for 8 years, the one who stayed late when everyone else left, who could read a balance sheet the way some people read faces. I told Glenn she'd keep the company running the way it was meant to. A week later, her appointment went public. Another small headline. Another quiet correction. I returned to my consulting office the next morning. The same small building on Chandler Street, with the same faded lettering on the glass Halden Consulting Group. My name had never been taken down here. The phone rang twice before I answered. A new client, referred through someone who'd heard the story. I took the call, quoted my rate, and confirmed the start date. After hanging up, I looked at the door again. My door. The paint was chipped, the hinge a little stiff, but it still opened easily when I pushed. I made coffee, opened a new project file, and began outlining system specs. It felt like starting over, but this time, everything with my name on it would stay that way. 6 months later, I stood at the edge of a campus lecture hall watching students file in with coffee cups and notepads, their eyes bright with a kind of ambition I remembered well. The screen behind me glowed with the title Slide, System Integrity and the Quiet Cost of Leadership. The professor gave a brief introduction light on credentials heavy on gratitude. I didn't need a long list of accomplishments. That wasn't why I came. In the front row, legs swinging slightly, sat Ava, my granddaughter. 11 years old, a notebook in her lap, already open. She had insisted on coming, told her mother it counted as extra credit. I spoke without notes. Talked about what happens when systems grow too fast without structure. How integrity isn't just about code, but who controls it. How the quiet decisions behind closed doors can decide the future of a product or a person. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. When the talk ended, the applause was genuine. The students didn't know the backstory. They didn't need to. They saw the work, the clarity, the authority in the way I explained a logic tree or traced an architecture flaw back to its root. Afterward, Ava tugged on my sleeve. "Is that the company you used to run?" I smiled. "Still mine, just not my job anymore." She nodded, like she understood more than she let on. Maybe she did. We walked out together, her hand in mine, into the courtyard, where spring was just starting to settle in. I paused once to look back at the lecture hall, the way it held their attention, the way their questions had pressed in with curiosity, not doubt. None of them knew what had been taken from me. But I knew what I'd built. And in that room, in their notebooks and their careful questions, I could see it still working, still shaping, still mine. We crossed the quad together. Ava told me about a science fair project. She wanted help with something involving optimization models for cafeteria lines. "I think I know a little about that," I said, and we kept walking.